Now, our next speaker is a meteorologist, but he wanted to understand how did Gutenberg go about making those first books. And to understand it, he had to do it. Please welcome out Matthew Dockrey.
So, I'm here to talk about the mass production of data. And like you said, this comes about from some explorations and experiments I've been doing over the last year. So, first of all, who am I? Like you said, I'm Matthew Dockrey. I'm an industrial artist from Seattle and meteorologist. I do public art installations, kinetic and fire sculpture at Burning Man, and occasionally I do recreations of historical artifacts when I have the time. And that's how this came about last year. I started to get into printing, like old school letterpress printing. And I really enjoyed it. I took some classes, and it really got me wondering where the technology came from and how it developed. And so, of course, the first thing you think of when you ask that question is Johannes Gutenberg. And probably everyone in this room knows better than to say he invented printing, because he didn't. It had been around for a long time before him. But he also didn't invent movable type. He didn't even invent metal movable type. Both of those had been around in China and Korea for quite some time before him. So given that, why do we still know his name? Why do we talk about him? And why do we perceive, quite rightly, that he changed the world in fundamental ways? So to understand that, you have to understand something about printing, which is that to print something, you need a lot of type, a lot of individual slugs of type. This type case is pretty representative. There are hundreds and hundreds of pieces there. To kind of drive this home, I took a page from Plutarch, more or less at random, and broke it out. And there are almost 3,000 individual characters on that one page, not counting spaces, including 419 lowercase e's alone. So if you want to print, you need a lot of type, and it needs to be pretty consistent. The tolerances are actually pretty tight for a 15th century process. So how did Gutenberg do it? Well, we don't know. The first documentation comes from about 100 years after his lifetime, and as you can see, it's not very good. This is literally it, and it doesn't even make a lot of sense when you look at it up close. By the time of the Enlightenment, we start to get some technical documentation of quality, and at that point, it matches the historical artifacts we do still have remaining. So we can say at that point pretty confidently how it was done. So this is a hand mold, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a mold you hold in your hand. You pour the lead in at the top, it flows into a letter form at the bottom, you open it up, a slug of type comes out, and you repeat that process hundreds of times. So now that raises the question, of course, is where does that letter form at the bottom come down? And it's called a matrix. This is actually the set of matrices that we get the modern typeface Garamond from. And you need one matrix for every letter, for every size, uppercase, lowercase. You need a lot of them. So now how do we make a lot of matrices? Well, you use something called punches, which is just a hardened steel punch in the shape of the letter you want, and you stamp that into the soft copper, and you have your matrix. And you can speed up the production of punches a little bit by using something called counter punches, which are just punches which form the negative space inside letters, and those can be reused to some degree. But for the most part, it comes down to carving and engraving these punches. So I wanted to understand that because I'm a metal guy. I like to get my hands on things. So I tried doing it. This is the negative space inside a capital letter D. It's not super hard, but it is fiddly, and it takes a lot of time. It would take upwards of a year to make one set of matrices. And I don't have that time, so I did what anyone in the 21st century does. I designed it in CAD and got it 3D printed. First in plastic, then in metal. And with that, I could actually start to do some typecasting and see how it works. So we made some type metal using a classic recipe, melted up and started pouring it in. And the results were, well, they were okay. Turns out there's this cool jerk technique that people who really knew what they were doing would do to force the molten type metal down into the letter form. But allowing for that, I think the results came out pretty interesting. And it led me to think about some things about this, which I hadn't really seen in that light before. But data is always physical, and it's easy to forget that now. But your data, your bits, they're stored in atoms somewhere, even if it's on the other side of the planet. And that implies a technological process and an industrial process to support that volume. And following from that, if you want to change the world, like Gutenberg did, you need mass production. A printing press by itself doesn't change the world. Unless you can actually take your invention to billions of people, it's just a novelty. And that's why I think we still know who Gutenberg is. So thank you very much. I have the hand mold and some type if you want to find me afterwards, and if we can find a corner, maybe we'll actually do some casting. So thank you.